Coffee roasters use events to help guide them through the roasting process, to understand what's happening to the beans, and to ultimately craft some wonderful tasting coffee. But there's one event that's often looked past, and I want to talk about that today here at the Virtual Coffee Lab, so stick around. All right, the event that I'm talking about is turning point. A lot of coffee roasters ignore this event because they don't think that it is relevant to them, or it really doesn't make much of a difference while they're roasting coffee. But for a home coffee roaster, or for somebody who's roasting a coffee for the first time, we are trying to understand more about the coffee itself and how we can use this information to roast some great coffee. I want to share with you 5 ways that we can benefit from the turning point information that we receive. But first, we need to identify what turning point is. Turning point is kind of an illusion that we see when we look at our tracking data, our coffee roasting data that we're getting through the probes that are reading bean temperatures. Some of us don't have that information and we're writing it down instead. The assumption is that all of us should be tracking and writing down our data, times, and temperatures. So turning point is the illusion where the bean temperature is decreasing right after the beans enter the roaster. We put the coffee beans in the roaster and immediately see the temperature start to decline, and we think, oh, the bean temperature is going down. Well, the reality is that the probe, this metal wire that's reading temperatures, is originally reading the environmental temperature of the roaster in the drum, assuming that it's a drum roaster. And when we introduce the coffee beans, now that temperature that's, say, 400 degrees is going to be lower because we're introducing room temperature beans into the roaster. The probe is touching those beans, and so we see the temperature decrease. We see the rate of rise drop on the bean temp, and we think, oh, the coffee bean temperatures are lowering. The reality is that the bean temperature never lowers. It's always increasing from room temperature up to the final end temperature when we drop the beans out of the roaster. Even though it's an illusion, this event provides us great information so that when we see the temperature reading change from a decreasing rate of rise to an increasing rate of rise, that event is marked as turning point, and we see a time and a temperature. That time and that temperature is going to be a source of reference for us. It's going to benefit us in 5 different ways. The first way that the turning point temperature benefits us is that we understand if we've picked the right charge temperature or not. Now, if we're roasting the same coffee over and over and over, chances are charge temperature has already been set. It's a no-brainer, and we're going to see consistency. But if this is the first time roasting this coffee, or if something has changed environmentally with our roaster or with the area that we're roasting in, if we're roasting in a garage, say, and the temperature is cooler or warmer, we're going to have variables that affect the charge temperature that ultimately affect the turning point temperature. So turning point is going to tell us whether we've chosen the right charge temperature or not. The second way we can benefit from turning point data is that it reveals information about how the coffee is responding to heat. It tells us a little bit more about the coffee. We may have purchased a coffee that we thought was a high density coffee, but this coffee is really responding to the heat quickly. Our turning point temperature is higher and our turning point time is shorter. And so this coffee is moving a lot quicker through this drying phase than I anticipated. I'm using the same charge temperature, but my times and temperatures reading on the turning point reveal otherwise. And so we can learn more about the coffee and how it responds to heat. Why is that important? It's important for roasting defects. That's the first and most obvious reason why we need to be thinking about what's happening with our coffee and how it's responding to heat is roasting defects. If this coffee is really sensitive to heat, then I need to be more careful with my heat adjustment, and I need to back off my heat a little bit so that I don't create roasting defects. I've got a whole video on roasting defects you can check out here in my playlist. Look at that if you need more information about roasting defects. But that's something that we need to be concerned about. It also tells us a little more about the bean itself. How dense is this bean? Is this a bean that is going to be able to handle more heat? Is this a bean that is going to take longer for heat to penetrate? Your turning point temperatures and times are going to give you an idea of what this bean is like and what you should do, what kind of changes you should make when roasting this bean in the future, as well as what you can expect even on this roast. All right, the third way we can benefit from turning point information is that it gives us a second chance if we've made a mistake. If we've chosen the wrong charge temperature, if we misinterpreted what this bean is like, if it's a higher density or a lower density bean, we have now an opportunity for a second chance to make a correction. As soon as we see that turning point data, the time and the temperature, we're going to know whether we've moved quicker or slower through the roasting process so far, and that's because the bean is different, the environment's different, and we need to make a change. It's our second chance to get this right before we get through to the dry end event, and from that point on, corrections are going to be more difficult, and ultimately they could and most likely will influence the taste of our coffee. You'll find this correction in your cup. And so we want to avoid that. We want to be able to make the corrections early on, as soon as we can, and turning point is going to allow us to do that. That is really an important point. That's one of the most important points for this talk today, is that we get a second chance if we pay attention to the turning point information. The time and the temperature. When we roast coffee over and over, we start to see patterns. We start to see similarities in times and temperatures, and when things are different, we should assume one of several things. The coffee is different, something with the roaster mechanically is different, or the environment is different. And so we need to be able to pinpoint what that is and learn from it so that on future roasts we can anticipate and or make adjustments. This is really, really important, and that's why having a second chance at making these corrections is really important. All right, the fourth way that we can benefit from turning point data is that it reveals to us information about what we can expect at dry end and first crack. Those are two really important events, and the turning point data could reveal what dry end might look like. We'll start with dry end first, okay? Let's say that our coffee is really sensitive to heat. It's a low density coffee and it is a natural process coffee. Chances are the time that it takes, not the time to get to dry end, I mean, that is going to be obvious too. It'll be more sensitive to heat, and so it'll get dry end quicker. But the amount of time that that coffee takes to turn color. So let's just say on a high density coffee that's washed, the amount of time, it might be 30 seconds. Once the coffee pales, it might be 30 seconds for that coffee to hit yellow. But on a dry process coffee that is low density, that window of color change gets much more narrow. So that tells us, hey, we've got to pay attention to what happens, watching the color so that we can mark that time correctly. And I talked about these different events in my previous video, which you'll see a link up here. But having these times marked correctly is going to help us with our roast, and we want to be able to do that. It'll also tell us maybe what first crack might behave like. We might see that first crack is a more rolling, lumbering first crack, or we might find that it's a more intense first crack based on how we've learned this coffee responds to heat. So we need to be prepared, and we can be prepared because we've got more information from Turning Point that's going to tell us how this coffee might behave during some of these other events. You know, we all use different coffee roasters, especially home roasters. I mean, we're using everything from frying pans to modified bread makers to drum roasters like this. And I've got a poll that's out on the community tab. If you've got a moment, please take that poll if you haven't taken it. I've got 130 or 150 people that have taken that poll so far, and it helps me understand more about the roasters that you're using so that I can craft great content for you. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, and more importantly, hit the subscribe button, because that directly benefits me and it helps me be able to produce more videos for you. All right, the fifth way that we can benefit from Turning Point information is that it reveals the pace of the roast. Turning Point data is kind of like training wheels for a new home coffee roaster. It's also great information and training wheels for somebody who's trying to learn about the beans. First time they're roasting the coffee, they're trying to see how the beans react to heat. And so Turning Point information is going to reveal a lot about this coffee and the pace of the roast and what's going to happen with the rest of our roast. If our pace is moving so quickly through the roast, it's going to be revealed through a very high temperature reading or a very short time reading for our Turning Point data. And we're going to want to try to make adjustments, corrections to our heat to try to get this roast back on track. If not, then we have to take that information and we're going to have to prepare to make adjustments to our roast times. What we don't want to do is have a roast move so quickly through the roasting process that we have underdeveloped coffee, and we don't want to drag it out so long that we've got a coffee that is a little more boring and flat. And most of that would be due to the fact that we haven't made adjustments to our other phases and trying to correct this first phase that has moved way too quick or way too long. Turning Point data that we receive not only reveals the pace, but it also will help us prepare to make adjustments as necessary to the roast. I hope this Turning Point information has been helpful to you. Again, hit the like button and subscribe. And if you want to learn more about the 3 phases of coffee roasting and basically how to roast great coffee, I've got a playlist up here, my Home Coffee Roasting Essentials playlist, as well as my events video that I did last week. So check those out. And I hope you guys have a great week roasting. See you next time.